But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, in order that you may proclaim the mighty acts of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you received mercy. What does it mean to be God's own people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation in 2014? And I'm thinking about this in light of a conversation that I was watching on Facebook between a whole pile of priests, because priests now talk to each other on Facebook, apparently. And the conversation was about this very short blog about a priest, and I don't know if they were commenting or lamenting or observing, but they were describing the phenomena of people who describe themselves as spiritual but not religious. And I think many people in the world today would describe themselves as spiritual but not religious. I think there's people at our church, people in this room, who might say they're spiritual but not religious. Even me, and I'm a priest. If I was to fill out some sort of survey describing myself, if I was going to, go on a TV show or something, I'd say, I'm somebody who likes good food, or I care for justice issues and the environment. But I'm not sure I would start out this profile by saying, well, first thing you need to know about me is I'm really religious. I don't think that that's how today in our society we would describe ourselves. And I think the main reason for that is how we use the word religious today. I think that if we watch ourselves and how we use it, I think we normally would use the word religious to say something like, well, I take my vitamins religiously. Or I watch, Sports Center every night religiously. Or I floss religiously. And by saying religious, we mean unwavering, never changing, really consistent. And then when we look at our own faith journey, and not just how we've reflected on our relationship with God, but to be honest, how we've been preaching, like me and all the other priests that you've listened to over the last generation, I don't think any of us would feel that we are sort of unwavering and never changing and rock solid when it comes to our relationship with God. I don't think that we would just say that, God totally sees me as really religious. And we don't have that sort of same tradition, right? It used to be when I was living in Quebec, you'd have women who would go every day for Mass, say confession multiple times per week. And you can almost say, if you go to church enough, you could say, I'm there every day. I am religious. I'm as religious about my church attendance as I am about flossing. I'm consistent. But a lot of us aren't like that. Even some of our most spiritual, most dedicated members will say, well, just so you know, I'm not going to be here for the next couple months because I'm going to be doing X, Y, and Z. And so I think that's sort of who we are now. We're a people who would not describe ourselves as religious. But as far as being spiritual, I think most people in this room would say that we are very spiritual. And I think we're in a culture that would describe itself as being a very spiritual culture. And I think by that, what most people mean is that we believe in something beyond ourselves, perhaps something holy or sacred. I think if we use spiritual as a word, we might not be comfortable necessarily with all the definitions of God that we're hearing, maybe on TV or from other people. Some people might not be comfortable saying that they believe in God, but they believe in something sacred. And for a lot of people, they've experienced something. And I think what probably unites most of us in this room, and certainly connects with me, is we've had some experience of the sacred that doesn't quite fit or connect with how the church talks about God, or how we've heard other people talk about God, or doesn't really fit with, say, the Nicene Creed, or with one of the Eucharistic prayers, or maybe some of the language in the Bible. So we've had this spiritual experience that we can't define, and we don't have a lot of language for it, and we probably don't want to find language for it, and we might not even want to find other people that have had the exact same experience we did, because I think part of the thing that legitimizes some of our spiritual experiences is that they're unique, they're special, and they're just for us. God understood us in that moment or in that time, and God spoke to us in a unique way that was special and unique and wonderful, and it's almost fantastic that it's not in any other book, or you've never really read about it. It's just something that belongs to me or belongs to you. I don't know if that connects with anything that you've experienced, but I think the world is filled with people that might not be describing themselves as religious anymore, but would describe themselves as deeply spiritual. And I think what stresses priests out is a lot of those people might not necessarily want to come to church or feel the need to come to church. Okay. But we're living in an interesting time. The Pope, inexplicably, is a rock star today. The Prime Minister's approval rating is at 44. President Obama's is at 45. The Pope is at 88%. His official approval rating. What's confusing about this is the Pope is very religious. I think a lot of people would describe him as very religious. I'm going to now make a turn because I want us all to leave this room being able to describe ourselves as spiritual and religious. Because if we look at the definition of religious, there are those words that we would tend to avoid, words like devout or pious. And I don't know, I mean, we absolutely have pious members of this church, but I don't know if any of us would self-describe as pious. I don't know if I would describe myself as, oh, I'm very pious. Let's put that on my little profile on Facebook. I'm pious, I'm devout. But we would describe ourselves as dedicated to a cause, dedicated to God, being committed to something, being committed to our faith, being committed to our church, committed to our families, committed to our values. And we would describe ourselves as faithful. And that's something that's separate from being spiritual. To be committed, dedicated, and faithful. I want to read you some of these quotes. These are some of the top 10 quotes from this rock star pope. I think that's just so fascinating. Who would have guessed 2 years ago that there'd be a rock star pope? This is fascinating. But listen to what he's saying and tell me if this is out there and strange and radical. The Lord never tires of forgiving. It is we who tire of asking for forgiveness. He talks about dissatisfied priests, sad priests, in some sense who have become, he says, collectors of antiques or novelties instead of being shepherds, living with the odor of sheep. This I ask you, he says, be shepherds with the odor of sheep. Make it real as shepherds among your flock, fishers of men. There's another one. How often is Jesus inside, knocking at the door to be let out? Men and women are sacrificed to the idols of profit and consumption. It is a culture of waste. Faith is not a light which scatters all our darkness, but a lamp which guides our steps in the night and suffices for our journey. If someone is gay and is searching for the Lord and has goodwill, then who am I to judge him? From the Pope, July 2013. An evangelizer must never look like someone who has just come back from a funeral. The Pope is religious because he is dedicated to the gospel. He's committed to the mission of the church. He's faithful to God and utterly fearless. I think that's what religious means. And I don't think the world is necessarily filled with religious people, because it's hard work to be dedicated to the gospel, or to take that experience that we've had, that spiritual experience, and be dedicated to it, be committed to it, follow through, and make that one of the central tenets of what you do when you wake up in the morning. You take that experience to work. You keep that experience front and center as your chief value. Be faithful to that experience and to God. And in spite of everything, to be utterly fearless. I think to be religious means to be called to do the work of God. To not just love Jesus, but to take up your mat and walk and follow Jesus. To not just love and respect the church, but to join the church and the cause and the mission and be dedicated to that which God is calling you to do. So are we dedicated to God? Dedicated to respond to God and God's gospel in our community, in our lives, in the world? Are we committed to see the beauty that has found its place in our hearts and allow it to become manifest in the world, to work to make something happen so that there's some congruence between the love in our hearts and the love we share in the world? I think the world is desperate for religious people. There's a desperate hunger. There's many people that desperately want to be religious and can't, and there are others who can, and I think there's a lot of us in this room who can, and the world is desperately asking us to be religious, to be committed and dedicated and faithful. I feel like we have a vocation in this church to be a religious place. And I don't think everybody can do it, and it's okay. And they'll recognize it, because if you're a spiritual person, you can recognize a legitimately religious person who's dedicated and faithful and committed to the same things that you love. I think we're called to be religious. And I don't think we should be embarrassed about it. I think we should be proud. Proud that we're dedicated and committed and faithful to God.